He bought her company in a single day. She had 90 days to take it back. The laboratory smelled faintly of antiseptic and electronics, a sterile combination that should have felt comforting to a scientist, but today it felt like a battlefield. Clara adjusted the sleeve of her lab coat and walked past rows of bioreactors, each one humming with life, pulsating with the rhythm of tiny cells she had nurtured for years. 7 years. 7 relentless years of synthesizing bioartificial skin, testing cellular matrices, and fine-tuning regenerative compounds. This wasn't just a project. It was a promise, a spark of hope for people who would otherwise perish silently in hospital wards, burn units, and accident rooms around the world. Every vial, every carefully measured droplet of serum was a piece of her soul. The sudden click of the door echoed sharply, breaking her concentration. Her eyes darted toward the entrance, expecting a junior researcher, a delivery of nanofiber samples, or maybe one of the lab assistants bringing her coffee. But it wasn't anyone she expected. It was Marcus Vance. His presence filled the room like a shadow swallowing the light. Tall, impeccably dressed, his posture sharp and calculated, he surveyed the lab as if it were an outdated code base, a system error to debug. There was no smile, no warmth, no recognition of the human lives in front of him. Only analysis. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," he said smoothly, his voice measured, flat, entirely devoid of emotion. "I now own 51% of this company. Consider this your new operating parameter." Clara's chest tightened. Her mind raced, adrenaline surging. You own what?" she asked, her voice caught between shock and disbelief. She tried to steady her shaking hands, but the edge of the workstation cut into her palms. "I didn't come to negotiate," Marcus continued, stepping further into the room, eyes scanning the lab benches and equipment. "I didn't come to offer partnership. I came to inform you that all your current operations are suspended immediately. Your technology, as it stands, is non-profitable, inefficient, risk-laden. You will follow my directives. That is non-negotiable." Clara's mind reeled. Non-profitable? Risk-laden? She had run the projections herself, presented the data to venture partners, and yet here was a man dismissing everything with the casual cruelty of someone deleting a corrupted file. "You don't understand," she said, trying to force calm into her tone. "This isn't just about profits. These treatments, they save lives. Thousands of lives. You can't just suspend them." Marcus tilted his head slightly, a faint motion, almost like amusement, but the coldness in his eyes never wavered. "I understand perfectly. Emotion is irrelevant. Business is relevant. Survival of the enterprise is relevant. Your idealism, admirable, but redundant." The hum of the incubators felt louder now, each pulse of the machines echoing the racing of her own heart. She gripped the edge of a counter, feeling the smooth steel beneath her fingers, grounding herself. "You're reducing my work, my life, to numbers on a spreadsheet," she said, voice rising with restrained fury. Marcus stepped closer, as if evaluating a stubborn piece of code. "Correct. And your mission now is to prove that this life-saving technology can fit within the framework of efficiency, scalability, and return on investment. Fail, and your child dies before it even breathes. Succeed, and maybe you keep some semblance of control." Clara's stomach turned. She could fight him, sure, lawyers, investors, press, but that would take months. And every day lost meant lives delayed, lives denied. And yet, he didn't see her. He didn't see a human being. She was a variable, a code error in his model. And still, somewhere deep inside, a small spark of defiance ignited. "I will not stop my work," she said finally, forcing her voice steady, firm, unwavering. "Not for you. Not for your spreadsheets. Not even for your empire." Marcus's eyes lingered on her for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly, a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, a hint of intrigue, or perhaps calculation. "We shall see," he said. The room was quiet again, the hum of machines now the only sound. Clara sank into her chair, pressing her forehead against her palm. Her mind replayed every second of that encounter, running calculations, imagining every worst-case scenario. The legal frameworks, the corporate leverage, the investors, everything was a minefield. She could feel the weight of inevitability pressing down on her shoulders. She walked to the large viewport overlooking the city, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the skyline of Zurich. From this height, everything looked calm, orderly, efficient, a world Marcus would approve of. But inside, Clara felt the chaos of a life under siege. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her mind sharpened. She would not surrender. She could not surrender. She returned to her workstation, examining the latest batch of cellular matrices. Each sample glimmered under the lab lights, delicate, fragile, yet resilient. This is what I fight for. Not money, not recognition, not control. Life itself. Her fingers hovered over the touch screen, running simulations she had memorized by heart. She allowed herself a single thought. He may own the company, but he doesn't own this work. Not yet. Hours passed in a blur of data, calculations, and obsessive testing. Marcus occasionally appeared at the lab doorway, watching, silent, calculating. There was no hostility in his gaze now, only scrutiny, and for the first time, Clara sensed something: respect. A grudging acknowledgement that she was not merely a pawn. She noted it, but kept her focus, refusing to let hope weaken her resolve. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crimson glow through the lab, Clara felt the first true pulse of determination in days. Marcus Vance had walked into her world like a storm, but storms could be weathered. They could be navigated, and she intended to navigate him, not as a subordinate, but as a force he could not ignore. For the first time since she had begun this project, the laboratory felt different. It was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a battlefield, and she intended to win. The private jet sliced through the crisp Swiss morning air, carrying Clara and Marcus toward a world that neither of them fully understood. For Clara, the sleek leather seats, polished steel fixtures, and the subtle hum of engines felt suffocating, a gilded cage in which she had no freedom. Marcus sat across from her, impeccably poised, his eyes scanning a tablet filled with project analytics. Not a word had been exchanged since boarding, yet the tension in the cabin was thick enough to touch. "You understand the parameters," Marcus said finally, his voice calm, precise, as though stating facts instead of engaging in conversation. "For the next 3 months, you will work under my supervision. Every experiment, every protocol, every meeting follows my standards. Adapt or fail." Clara clenched her jaw. "You mean, adapt to your standards, not scientific standards?" she shot back, voice measured but laced with frustration. "Science has its own rules. Not all of them fit neatly into your spreadsheets." He raised an eyebrow, a faint trace of amusement flickering in his eyes. "We'll see if your science can survive in the real world." From the first day at his Zurich headquarters, Clara realized the full extent of Marcus's control. She was no longer in her sanctuary, surrounded by familiar equipment and colleagues who respected her methods. Here, every gesture was monitored, every decision scrutinized. She was assigned to a high-security lab, restricted to specific hours, her research data automatically logged into corporate servers. Even the coffee she drank was measured. And yet, amidst this imposed confinement, she found an unexpected rhythm. Marcus, despite his cold demeanor, was present in ways she had not anticipated. Not in a supportive manner, nor even in kindness, but in constant scrutiny, challenging her hypotheses, testing the limits of her creativity. "You overestimated the regenerative coefficient in your latest batch," Marcus said one evening, standing behind her as she examined a set of bioreactors. His presence was intrusive, yet oddly illuminating. "You see the cells as independent units. In reality, they interact like nodes in a network. Efficiency is not about volume. It is about connectivity." Clara inhaled sharply, not out of fear, but from a flicker of admiration she did not intend to acknowledge. "I understand. And yet, if we reduce the volume, some patients may not receive the treatment in time. The delay could be critical." He studied her, eyes narrowing slightly, not with derision but with attention. "Then find another solution. Efficiency without compromise. That is your challenge." Days turned into nights as they worked together, side by side. Data streams, biochemical analyses, regulatory paperwork, they became the threads binding them together. Marcus began to see her differently. She was no ordinary scientist, no passive subordinate to bend at his will. She was relentless, unafraid to challenge him, unafraid to confront the cold logic he wielded like a weapon. And, for the first time, He felt the stirrings of respect. Clara, in turn, studied him beyond the veneer of ruthless efficiency. She saw the subtle shifts, the moments where his logic faltered, where human curiosity peeked through the rigid patterns. She noticed the way he paused before issuing a harsh critique, how he lingered on an explanation longer than necessary, perhaps searching for understanding. And, despite herself, she began to feel a fragile trust, an acknowledgement that beneath the steel and calculation, Marcus was capable of something more than dominance. One evening, after hours of analyzing cellular connectivity charts, Marcus leaned back in his chair and let a rare smirk escape. "You're the first person who has ever challenged me and not crumpled under the pressure," he admitted, almost reluctantly. "And it's unsettling." Clara gave a tight-lipped smile. "I'm not here to make you comfortable. I'm here to save lives. Remember that." The tension between them, initially brittle and adversarial, began to bend into something more complex. Shared victories, small adjustments that increased the yield of biosynthetic skin, corrections that saved weeks of experimental time, became private triumphs. The quiet moments between late-night simulations, when Marcus silently passed her a new data report or commented on an unexpected anomaly, carried a subtle intimacy that neither could fully name. Then came the journey to present their progress to potential investors, a grueling series of flights, boardrooms, and high-stakes negotiations. During one particularly grueling session in London, a technical malfunction threatened to ruin Marcus's carefully prepared presentation. Panic flared in the room. The investors murmured among themselves, eyes flicking to the tablet screens, waiting for a solution. Clara didn't hesitate. Drawing on every ounce of her knowledge, she recalibrated the software, rerouted the data streams, and delivered a live demonstration, flawless and precise. Marcus watched, silently acknowledging what she had just accomplished. He didn't touch her shoulder, didn't speak a word, but the shift was undeniable. The man who had once reduced her to a variable now saw her as indispensable. A partner. On the flight back to Zurich, neither spoke much. But the air between them was different. The spark had ignited, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a current flowing beneath a still surface. Marcus no longer treated her merely as an asset to optimize. He recognized her mind, her courage, her tenacity. Clara, meanwhile, realized that beneath his ruthless exterior was a man capable of acknowledgement, a man who, despite every instinct, might just understand the value of human passion. 3 months stretched ahead of them, a crucible designed to test the limits of control, efficiency, and endurance. Every night, Clara lay awake in the sterile guest quarters, contemplating the paradox. She was both captive and privileged, under constant scrutiny, yet gaining unparalleled insight. Marcus, for all his precision and cold calculation, had inadvertently taught her something vital, that even in the harshest environment, human ingenuity and moral conviction could carve a path where mere profit-driven logic could not. And Marcus, behind the veneer of his corporate armor, began to realize that perhaps control was not the ultimate goal. Perhaps partnership, if he could admit it, even to himself, was a far more dangerous and intoxicating equation than any spreadsheet could calculate. By the time the first snow blanketed Zurich in a soft white silence, Clara had survived her first weeks of captivity and emerged with something she hadn't expected. A fragile, unspoken alliance, forged not in warmth or friendship, but in relentless challenge and mutual respect. And deep beneath that alliance, a quiet ember of something more was beginning to glow. The lab was no longer merely a battleground. It had become the arena in which minds, wills, and hearts were tested. And for the first time, Clara realized that winning might not just be about saving her technology, but about navigating the perilous terrain of trust, desire, and intellect with the man who could destroy it all with a single decision. The Zurich skyline gleamed under a pale morning sun, glass towers catching light like the eyes of predators. Inside the Vance corporate headquarters, the atmosphere was colder than the winter air outside. Clara had just begun to find her rhythm in Marcus's controlled world, and for the first time, she allowed herself a flicker of confidence, an understanding that, even under scrutiny, her brilliance could not be suppressed. And then came the shadow that had loomed over Marcus's life since birth, Arthur Vance. He entered the lab without knocking, a man of imposing stature and presence, the kind that commanded attention without a word. His silver hair and impeccable suit were complemented by eyes sharp and unyielding, like twin daggers honed on decades of corporate warfare. Marcus stiffened, straightening in his chair as Arthur's gaze swept across the lab. He had arrived not to observe, but to dominate, to remind everyone that the empire he built tolerated no deviations. "Clara," Arthur said, his voice smooth but cold, measured to cut precisely where it would hurt. "You are temporary. A glitch in my son's otherwise perfect system. Do not mistake his indulgence for significance." Clara's stomach churned, a mixture of fear and righteous indignation. She had heard whispers of Marcus's father, of the man who shaped him into the calculating executive sitting across the lab, but now the reality struck with brutal clarity. Arthur was not a negotiator, not a mentor. He was a predator, and she was prey in his carefully orchestrated world. "Temporary," she repeated, her voice steady but edged with steel. "I'm not a mistake, and I am not here to play games." Arthur's eyes flickered toward Marcus, who remained silent, jaw tight. "Do not interrupt. You must understand your place. Your work may be impressive, but it serves a higher function, one that extends beyond your naive morality. My son is not weak enough to allow sentimentality to endanger the empire. And yet, I see potential compromise." The words landed like stones. Clara felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She had begun to trust Marcus, had allowed herself to believe that they might work as partners, that he could recognize value beyond profit margins. And now, she was being reminded that Marcus was a son first, an heir to a dynasty whose priorities eclipsed human decency. In the days that followed, Arthur's presence was a constant threat. He scrutinized Clara's data, critiqued every procedural choice, and subtly undermined her credibility. But his most dangerous weapon was deception. One morning, she received a discreet package containing falsified emails and financial statements, all pointing to Marcus as the instigator of a sale she had never agreed to. Her life-saving technology redirected toward military applications. Clara stared at the documents, disbelief and horror mixing in equal measure. Every line, every signature seemed authentic. Her mind raced. Marcus, he wouldn't, would he? The thought alone was enough to ignite a spark of panic. Could the man she had begun to respect, and perhaps even trust, be the architect of her greatest betrayal? When she confronted Marcus, her hands trembling, her voice breaking slightly, he was calm, almost unnervingly so. "Clara, I have no knowledge of these transactions," he said, his eyes betraying only the smallest flicker of concern. "Check your sources. Do not make decisions based on assumptions." But the seed of doubt had been planted. Clara felt it grow, tendrils of fear curling through her mind, poisoning her judgment. She began to question everything, every glance, every late-night discussion, every shared success. Had he been manipulating her from the start? Had the nights they spent recalibrating experiments been a facade, a means to extract secrets? Arthur, watching from the periphery, smiled faintly. He had achieved the first stage of his plan. The man who owned 51% of the company was conflicted, unsure, caught between loyalty to his father and his growing respect for Clara. And the woman herself, brilliant, unyielding, human, was now a battlefield of doubt and fear. The final blow came at a high-profile corporate dinner. Investors, board members, and key stakeholders gathered, their eyes flicking between Clara and Marcus as subtle games of power played out across the polished oak table. Clara, still grappling with the falsified evidence, felt her pulse quicken. In a moment of anger and perceived betrayal, she struck Marcus, not physically, but verbally and with public impact, a rebuke that stunned everyone in the room. "You were never on my side," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs, though her eyes held a sharp, hidden flick of intent. "Every calculation, every decision, was it all just a game? My work, my life, my vision, you've manipulated it all." The room went silent. Marcus's face was unreadable, a mask perfected over years of strategy. Yet inside, a storm raged. He could either bend to his father's will, secure the empire, and let her walk, or risk everything to prove that she had been right about him all along. And through the tension, Arthur's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He had set the trap perfectly, a rift that threatened both the project and the fragile trust that had begun to form. The war for Clara's technology, and perhaps for her heart, was only beginning. The fallout from the dinner hung over the headquarters like a toxic fog. Clara didn't retreat to her lab. She locked herself in the archive room, her mind a cold machine. She realized her public outburst had played right into Arthur's hands, unless she could turn her perceived instability into a smokescreen. When Marcus found her hours later, his silhouette blocked the light of the doorway. He didn't offer comfort. He offered an encrypted drive. "If you're going to burn my father's world down, Clara," he whispered, his voice jagged with a choice he had finally made, "make sure you have the right accelerant." The boardroom was tense, a carefully orchestrated silence hanging over polished oak and glass surfaces. Every executive, every investor, every shadowed assistant knew this meeting was unlike any other. The annual shareholders' assembly had begun, and behind the facade of routine presentations and financial summaries, Clara and Marcus had laid the groundwork for a storm that no one, not even Arthur Vance, could predict. Clara stood at the edge of the room, her heart hammering. Months of deception, manipulation, doubt, and sleepless nights had led her to this moment. She had seen Marcus as both adversary and partner, as a man shaped by a father whose obsession with control had poisoned every decision. But now, armed with proof of Arthur's true intentions, she held the key to reclaiming not only her technology, but also her dignity, her company, and perhaps even a measure of trust between them. Marcus stood by the window as she entered the boardroom, the encrypted drive already plugged into the main console. He didn't need to hand her anything. They had spent the last 48 hours in a fever of silent coordination. "The board is waiting, Clara," he said, his voice steady, devoid of the hesitation that had haunted him for years. "The evidence is live on the server. All you have to do is trigger the sequence." Clara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I've waited too long for this. Let's end it." As the meeting began, Arthur took the floor first, his voice confident, smooth, projecting authority like a polished blade. "Shareholders, as you know, our company continues to lead in biomedical innovation. Recent strategic opportunities," he trailed into a rehearsed speech, a script designed to present him as visionary, unassailable. Yet every word he uttered, every gesture he made, had already been anticipated. Clara stepped forward as he paused, drawing the room's attention. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear, ringing with controlled authority. "Before we move further, there's something you all need to see." She opened the folder, projecting documents onto the screen behind her. Emails, signed contracts, and internal notes filled the space, each piece a dagger revealing Arthur's plan to sell her life-saving technology to military contractors. Gasps rippled through the room. Investors leaned forward. Board members exchanged shocked glances. Arthur's confident smile faltered, replaced by a cold, tightening glare. "I trusted the company's leadership to protect this technology," Clara continued, voice steady but piercing. "Instead, I discovered a plan to weaponize it, to pervert the very purpose of years of research. And the person orchestrating this? Not Marcus, as I was falsely led to believe, but the man sitting right there." Her eyes locked on Arthur. Arthur Vance. Arthur's mask cracked for the first time. He opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus stepped forward, calm but unyielding. "The evidence is clear. Any attempt to dispute it will be examined in full transparency. The board and shareholders now have the choice: condone deception and risk reputational collapse, or act to uphold the integrity of the company." Silence fell, heavier than any words. Arthur's influence, cultivated over decades, now collided with undeniable truth. Clara felt a surge of vindication, not for personal triumph, but for the lives that depended on her creation. The board voted swiftly, decisively. Arthur was removed from all executive functions, stripped of control over company decisions. His plans lay exposed, neutralized, and the technology remained in the hands of those who would use it to heal, not harm. Clara exhaled, relief washing over her, but it was tinged with exhaustion. Marcus approached her, offering a hand, a gesture simple, yet filled with meaning. "It's over," he said. "We did it." She took his hand, feeling the weight of months of struggle, doubt, and challenge pass between them. "We did," she agreed, voice softening. But it wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that this work, that life, matters more than control or legacy. Marcus nodded, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. I came to buy your research, he said, voice low, almost intimate. And I ended up giving you back your freedom and mine. For the first time, they looked at each other not as adversaries, not as cautious allies, but as equals. The battles behind them had forged something resilient. Mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet recognition that together, they could navigate the most treacherous terrains of both business and heart. In the days that followed, the 51% share was legally restructured. Marcus didn't just step down. He initiated a complete severance from the Vance legacy, transferring the controlling interest back to Clara's foundation. He remained not as an owner, but as a silent architect of their new venture. The laboratory was no longer his asset or her prison. It was their shared neutral ground. And for Clara, the victory was more than legal or financial. It was moral, personal, and profound. Her work would save lives. Her mind would not be compromised by deception. And, perhaps most unexpectedly, her heart found its counterpart in Marcus. Not as a subordinate, not as a variable in a system, but as a man who had chosen truth over legacy, partnership over dominance, and human connection over mere calculation. The empire of Vance was left behind, a shadow fading in the distance. Ahead lay innovation, purpose, and a partnership forged in challenge, forged in fire. And somewhere deep in the quiet of the lab, Clara allowed herself a small, rare smile. The battle was over. The war for integrity had been won.